74th birthday. Born on the 8th of January 1947, his music and his artistry impacted people all over the world. And it's been 5 years now since his death, which came just after his birthday in 2016. Fans in Somerset have been telling us their memories of David Bowie, his life, his death, his legacy, and here's some of them now coming up. Their stories told to BBC Radio Somerset's Emma Rushton.
It's a god-awful small affair.
2 days after David Bowie's 69th birthday, the 10th of January 2016, the worst news came for Bowie fans.
Some breaking news in to us just now this morning. It's been confirmed that David Bowie, singer and musician, has died at the age of 69 this morning.
In the days that followed, fans came together to share their grief at the loss of the singer and artist they'd grown to love. 22-year-old Laura King from North Somerset told me about the moment she heard of the singer's death.
My mum came into my room and she started tearing up, and I was like, oh my God, what's happened? David Bowie's died. And I just sat there and I was like, what? And she's like, yeah, it happened last night. And I was like, is it on the news? And she said, yeah. So I just bolted downstairs and the headline just said, David Bowie's died, and I burst into tears.
Following David Bowie's death, Andy Jones from Somerset set up a fan magazine to pay tribute to the legend that was Bowie. He told me about how the loss felt to him.
My son woke me at it would have been about 6 in the morning, and said, David Bowie's dead. And I said, he can't be, there's no way. He only brought an album out 2 days ago. He said, no, he's died, he's passed away. And that just, when your stomach sinks to the bottom of your shoes, it's one of those feelings, really. In a way, it was worse than losing some more distant family members, really, because he played such a large part of my life. It was gutting, and although it's got easier over the last 5 years, I still can't believe he's gone. It's still quite incredible, because when David Bowie brought an album out, it was an event. But yeah, that day was awful, and then they did the Brits, and that was really emotional, because Annie Lennox made a fantastic speech.
Even if they didn't know him personally, many people must feel as if things will never be quite the same again. He had that special kind of significance.
Which was really emotional and very touching. That was difficult to get through, really.
Malcolm White from Bridgewater is 62. He told me how he felt the day he found out Bowie had died.
I was coming down the stairs and my wife and son were watching the TV, and my wife was looking at me and obviously something was up, and my son said, oh, Bowie's dead. And it was like, it was a bolt from the blue, because there was no hint. I mean, nobody knew what he was doing anyway. I mean, he just brought the latest album out, Black Star, the last album. But, I mean, he hadn't been seen in public. I think he made an appearance at the Lazarus opening night, which was the musical he wrote. And he obviously didn't look well. He looked very thin and frail then. But there was no hint, because he was a very private person, there was no hint. It's like a bolt from the blue, really.
So what is it about David Bowie that inspires people? Laura told me about the moment her love affair with him started.
For me, I'd known about him since I was a kid, because my brother lent me his copy of Labyrinth to watch. And so, suffice to say, The Goblin King was probably like my first movie crush. I fell in love with it, everything about it. And actually, my copy of the DVD, I had to buy a new one because it was scratched on the ballroom scene, because I kept rewinding to that scene every time I watched it, because I just loved everything about it, like the costumes, the hair, the makeup, the voice, just everything. And then as I grew up, I kind of got this thought in my head. I was like, oh, I want to know more about the guy who plays the Goblin King. So then I started like finding his music and everything, buying his CDs, buying the books, and just got more and more into him. But unfortunately, I chose to get into him the summer of 2015.
Andy, who's 62 now, had a very different experience with Bowie and grew up with him.
He brought out a record in autumn of 72 called John, I'm Only Dancing. And there was a fantastic video by Mick Rock to go along with that. And that's really what turned me on to Bowie. Bowie kept moving with the times, changing his musical style rather than fitting into one genre. So he just had a bit more class, I think. And of course his songwriting was supreme.
Malcolm had a very similar start when it came to Bowie.
Like most, I think, most fans of my age, it was the Top of the Pops appearance in '72, the Starman. It was just something that nobody had ever seen before, you know? In those days, I was 14 at the time, and you'd run home from school of a Thursday night and watch Top of the Pops. You sat watching Top of the Pops that night, and this thing appeared with the spiky hair and the outfit. The following day in school, everybody was saying, "Did you see that last night? Did you see that guy last night?" You know, or was it a woman even? You know, it was just mind blowing. I was hooked from day one, to be honest.
Did you ever see him live in Somerset? Did you ever meet him?
I never met him. It's one of the biggest regrets of my life. I saw him lots of times in Somerset. I saw him at Weston-super-Mare on the 1st of July 1972. I saw him at the Anson Rooms in Bristol. I think that was around, I can't remember, it was April or May 72. He wasn't very well known at that point. And then I saw him again in Taunton Odeon, and he did 2 shows there in one day. I saw both of those. So yeah, I saw him lots of times, really.
And as a performer, how was he?
Oh, dead exciting. I mean, 1972, he was more accessible. So, for example, you could walk into, I'll give you an example at Weston-super-Mare, you could have walked into the Winter Gardens at Weston-super-Mare and walked up to the stage easily. But in 1973, he hit new levels of superstardom, and it was impossible, really, to be able to get close to him or meet him. And in 1972 as well, tickets were fairly easily acquired, so you could pay your 50p, which is what it was when I first saw him, and you could on the night, you know, you didn't have to get tickets in advance. Whereas in 1973, it was a bit more of a challenge to get tickets.
Andy was lucky enough to have seen Bowie numerous times, but for Laura and for Malcolm, it's a very different story.
Unfortunately, I had tickets when he did Taunton in the 70s. He did 2 shows at the Odeon, and I went down with chicken pox. Fortunately for me, in a way, I discovered a few months later that I'm no good for crowds. I wouldn't have survived it. So, no, I didn't, to be honest.
Something happened on the day he died.
By the time it was announced that Black Star was coming out, I was really excited. It's one of my biggest regrets that I wasn't into him sooner, but I feel like by the time I had kind of reached that age, it was when he kind of stopped touring. But when Black Star came out, I thought, oh, he might make a return, and, you know, that didn't happen.
And you can't talk to David Bowie fans without asking them what record of his they loved the most.
John, I'm Only Dancing, because it's the first one that really, really got me heavily into Bowie. The video is incredible, stylish. It's a very different song.
I go back and forth. It really depends kind of what I'm in the mood for. But I think if I had to pick one straight off the top of my head, I'd have to say Lady Grinning Soul.
Oh, Panic in Detroit for me, off the Lad Insane album. It's just one of those really, really powerful songs with the drum beat, and the backing vocals were done by Linda Lewis with a high-pitched voice at the back, and it's a stunning song.
So what kind of legacy has Bowie left for his fans, and what does he mean to them? Andy, Laura and Malcolm told me just how important the singer is.
What he represents is kind of this ability to constantly change yourself throughout your life and never stay the same on anything. And even if something kind of scares you or you're not sure about it, just do it, because if you don't, it's a wasted opportunity. And just the fact that through 50 years, he never stopped. He was always constantly changing himself and just being out there.
What attracted me, and has always attracted me, is that any band or artist that you're a fan of, you know what their type of music is. You know when you buy an Ed Sheeran album or a Coldplay album or a U2 album, you know what you're going to get. You never did with Bowie. You could buy an album and it was a rock album, and the next album he brought out was an American soul album, and nobody else ever did that. It was just a constant not knowing what you were getting, you know?
He was such a massive part of my life. I cannot imagine my life without him. He meant a terrific amount to me. He still does. He still does. And always will, really.
There's a starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our minds. There's a starman waiting in the sky.
Some great stories there, weren't there? Fans from Somerset telling Emma Rushton their memories of David Bowie. 22-year-old Laura King from North Somerset, 62-year-old Andy Jones, who created a fanzine following the singer's death, and 62-year-old Malcolm White from Bridgewater. Some fantastic stories and some great music.